Are we live? Okay, I got the signal that we're live. So I am Chair Barris, and I am the chair of this Planning Commission, and I'd just like to welcome everyone here to our meeting tonight. It's always great to have participation from the public, and so glad you're here. Just to make a clarification, the items that we have on our business tonight are all like administrative type items, and so we don't get public input, but we do have an item for a call to the public. So if anybody wanted to make a general comment, that'd be a time for that. But certainly those that are here to speak to the items, like if you're the applicant, we'll have you come forward and answer some questions. So just for that little bit of clarification. Our first item of business tonight is to do an approval of the minutes from the last meeting, January 26th, 2023, from the Planning Commission. So hopefully the Planning Commissioners have had a chance to review those minutes. Are there any suggestions for any additions or deletions from those minutes?
I saw none, and I will just make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. If there's nothing to add or delete, then we'll just go, I'll entertain a motion.
We had a motion and a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed it. Sorry. Thank you. So we have we'll start the vote. Let's just do a voice vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So those minutes are unanimously approved. So we'll go on to our next item of business, which is a conditional use permit for a major B home occupation for Forseti LLC, a home-based firearms and sporting accessory retailer located at 71 North Gray Fox Circle. And I believe last time this is one we had tabled, and so, but we have the applicant here. So, but before we have you speak, we're going to have the staff give their report. Is that okay? And then we'll have you come up afterwards. Thanks.
So he is triple booked tonight, so we'll.
Okay, yeah, we'll try to be time sensitive here.
So I appreciate you coming. This conditional use permit actually came before us at our previous planning commission, and the commissioners had several questions, and so we're just presenting it back. Once again, he is a home-based firearms and supporting accessory retailer, so he has clients that will come to the home. He'll help them pick the accessories and things that they're going to want for their firearm, help educate them and let them know what they may or may not want. He's also a certified concealed firearm instructor, and this is where the questions came from. Planning Commission was how many people he was going to be wanting to have in those classes and how that would look for the neighborhood. He will be the instructor, and they'll be doing the classes there at the residence. And staff is recommending approval of this conditional use permit based on conditions from Planning Commission.
Okay. Well, thanks for the applicant for being here. If you'll just step up to the podium and make sure you state your name. And then, okay. And then commissioners, what questions do you have for the applicant?
I think we had a question on number of classes and when, times that you were anticipating, and then number of persons who would be at the home, and just concerns about parking and impact on the neighbors.
Yeah, for sure. It's been about 2 years since I taught a class. The last class was about 4 or 5 people. I try to keep the rates around $35 a participant in the class. The classes last about 5 hours. So for me to break even, like after my time, the preparation of the applications and that kind of stuff, and the cost of the equipment that I purchased, I try to keep it around 5 to 6 participants. That said, the more I can get, the better, right? Now, I would actually prefer not to teach them at my house. I prefer, like, if Kaysville City had a building or a classroom that could rent me for like $30 or something like that, or if there's another facility that would allow that, that would be my preferred option, because my wife doesn't like a bunch of people coming in her house. But like I said, it's been almost 2 years since I taught a class, and since the state of Utah passed their concealed carry law, now you can carry concealed unloaded. The demand for concealed carry permits has dropped.
Okay.
So,
I'd like to comment. I really think this is a great application in front of us. I dealt with one of these earlier I happen to be a retired city planner, so I've dealt with this before in another location, 2 different locations. And I think this is a great service that you're offering. I would make a suggestion to you. The only suggestion that I have, because I've circled what I think the staff report, I think the staff report is really brief and really to the point, and I don't know that we needed to go any more in depth, so I appreciate that from our staff. But, you know, in terms of providing classes, I would encourage you to even look to Kaysville City to see if they have an additional room. I worked for a city where we had a basement that had a bunch of rooms in it, and we most of the time would not charge for just a minimal use. I mean, it was like we'd held tons of events there, and I don't know if Kaysville City has any space here at City Hall, but in my opinion, what you're doing, what you're proposing is a public service because it's about firearm safety, which is always an issue. So I don't know if the city would be willing to look at that, but I mean, maybe the old library over here or the new library, but I would think that in one of our public facilities, there should be a classroom or an instruction room, and I suggest you reach out to Mindy and or Melinda and see if there's a way to do that, especially since you've expressed concern about people coming into the home. So for what it's worth, you know, maybe that's not even necessary.
No, for sure. And again, it's been more than 2 years. I don't have any scheduled. Right now, just moved there December 7th, so there's no plan on teaching any.
Well, just to clarify, I'm not opposed to you having them in the home. I'm just saying, if that's a concern, you might want to look at that because we handled countless requests from the public and organizations, and it just was a wonderful thing that we were able to do. And I'd hope the city, with its spaces, had perhaps the ability to do that. But again, I for one, as a planning commissioner, am supportive of the application without really any concerns.
Awesome. Appreciate your feedback.
Is there a minimum, or excuse me, a maximum that's just in the code in terms of how many, if there was classes?
Would it be 12, like the childcare?
So as the ordinance in Kaysville City Code 1726-4, Melinda's going to pull that up right now. I think it was under G. It actually for so if you look on, she'll pull this up 1 second. So you can see right here, in the major home occupation B may include but are not necessarily limited to the following. So C states, organized classes, limits shall be placed on the number of students and or number of vehicles transporting students to prevent congestion. So we have a number, as you can see down on H, for preschools. It says 12 students in any class. That's pretty typical, but there's not, we do not have anything, we don't have a number already predetermined for situations like this. So if you go back, if you want to show them his home.
And point of clarification too, that's not my house on it. Mine's right next to that one.
I could not tell, I tried.
Yeah, no, if you Google it, that one is where it's pointing, but mine's the Rambler right next to it.
So it's at the top of a cul-de-sac.
That's the property.
That's the correct
Okay.
one, but it shows the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I went back and forth anyway.
I can't afford that other one.
So you can see it's at the top of at the cul-de-sac. So you might have limited parking, obviously.
So I guess my take is the reason I would assume, or at least my interpretation of why there's a difference between preschools, and I think we talked about this last time. Preschools is a drop off and leave and then come back, right? There's no parking for the whole 4 hours or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that is a little bit of a different impact to a neighborhood. I think our question or our task should be, do we think, or whatever condition, do we think there should be a limit on number of students? If so, what does that look like? Are we talking number of cars like the ordinance says, number of students? I think that's one of the questions we really, probably the only, if only question we should probably grapple with. Because it doesn't seem like there's going to be deliveries that are going to be a lot different than any other home. There's not going to be storage of materials or parts or what have you. It sounds like really the only impact I see is the parking and the student issue.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. Agreed.
So I was just noticing as you look at this aerial shot, clearly all these vehicles are here because all these homes are under construction. It's all
There's
the
no
trees.
driveway right as well on that.
So, you know, there's, that could give you an idea of how parking on street would happen should there be a class with multiple participants.
Yeah. So the ordinance does allow us to limit students or, number of cars. So do the commissioners have a preference on
So
either of those
if I
methods?
might, real quick too, parking was an issue at my last location. There was no limited number of vehicles or to the number of students in the class, but there was like limited real estate where they could park. And so I instructed people to park in a parking lot down the street. It was a Winco parking lot, and then just either walk to my location, which was 2 blocks away or whatnot. It's a little bit different here, as there's not a public place where they might go to park.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things I did as well, where I was at previously.
Okay.
I think as long as they're not blocking mailboxes and driveways, and we still want to probably limit it though.
Commissioner Allred would like to comment again. I agree with the last comment that I heard. I do think we have a responsibility as planning commissioners, public servants, to allow for public streets to be used for public parking. And as long as the classes don't block anyone's driveway, nobody parks in anybody's driveway or blocks fire hydrants or mailboxes during normal delivery hours, I don't think we should artificially limit the use of our public right-of-way. That's why it's there. And often people want to say, I don't like people parking in front of my house. I've got a neighbor who in the summertime parks his car backwards in front of my house under a tree that I have because it provides shade. And my wife will often comment on how much it irritates her. And I said, why? That's a public street. It's public parking. It belongs to everyone. And he should have the right to have people come to his home as long as they don't abuse anybody's private property right to access to their own property. But I think for his own sake, he probably would want to limit this to 10 or fewer people. But we have extra wide rights of way in our community, so I don't see it as an issue. With the caveats I mentioned.
I would say, I mean, I agree with you, Paul. I think that the only thing was there has been kind of a precedent set so that, you can kind of, balance property rights, for the neighbors and so forth. So, that we've always imposed some type of restrictions on number of students or cars. So certainly we could be liberal and, allow a lot so that it's not going to, inhibit the applicant from keeping the class sizes where he wants, but then also balance that with the, the rights of the neighbors too. So, yeah. Whatever, I mean, I'm right with whatever the commissioners, wherever you want to go with this, though, so.
Good comment.
I agree with what Paul said in general. The thing that I'm struggling with is not all rights of way are created equal, right? Some rights of way are more heavily used than others. And so some may be more conducive to allowing vast amounts of parking as opposed to others. And I'm not saying necessarily what I think, because I haven't figured out that means for this particular application. I guess I'll just throw it out there, my thought would be then the balancing of the comment that Paul made, and I guess the thing that's in my mind is setting it at 12. even though it's not preschool, there will be 12 cars parked there for 4 or 5 hours, or maybe less than 12, if some people join together.
Oftentimes, oftentimes they are like friends or associates of mine,
Yeah.
people I know. I say, hey, if you can get a bunch of people together where we have enough for class, come on by. So more often than not, they carpool. It's very rare that I have 12 people that are independent families that would travel.
So would it make sense to say 12 cars?
Because that would not limit you, right? If we said 12 cars, that would not limit you.
I haven't ever experienced a situation where there's been more than 12 vehicles.
Yeah.
So that would give you wiggle room.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it could even be too that if I find that I'm pushing that, I could maybe come back and do a proposal for maybe to increase if that was ever an issue. But I don't ever see that being an issue.
Okay.
Again, like mentioned earlier, I'd much more prefer a location, an affordable location outside my home where I could teach it.
Sure. Okay. Any other discussion needed, commissioners? You're welcome to sit down and we'll make a vote. So I'm ready to entertain a motion if you're ready.
I'll make the motion.
All right, thanks.
I motion that we approve the conditional use permit as presented in the staff report for the home occupation for Versetti LLC at 71 North Gray Fox Circle with the following conditions of approval. That the home occupation be limited to class size of no more than 12 students at any time and no more than 12 cars on the public right-of-way at any given time, with an encouragement or a requirement for the applicant to encourage carpooling if possible for any class, and that prior to any class, all attendees will be advised either electronically or by phone or by mail that they will not be, that may not, or that they are prohibited to park in any adjacent private driveway or to block any mailbox, fire hydrant, or other access to private property.
Okay.
Can I make a comment or question on that?
Yes.
Sure.
I would second that if it just said 12 cars and not limited to 12 students. Because the way I look at it is the car is the impact.
limiting factor, yeah.
If there's 12 clown cars and he could get 50 students and his wife would accept that, great. There's still just 12 cars in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I would say don't necessarily cap the class size as much as cap the cars.
The motioner accepts that
Amendment?
amendment to the motion.
Cool. Okay.
Then I second it then.
Okay, so we got a motion and a second. We'll start the voting with Commissioner Allred. You.
Aye.
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 Okay, the motion is approved unanimously, so you got your conditional use permit. All right, we'll go on to item 4, which is a conditional use permit for Major B home occupation for Helpful Home Buyers LLC for Adam Stevens for a remodeling contractor business located at 605 South, 400 East. We'll turn over the time to staff for their report.
All right, so Helpful Home Buyers is requesting a business license, or they have applied for a business license. Adam Stevens is the business owner, and they are located at 605 South, 400 East. As you can see from this aerial picture, he is also at the top of a cul-de-sac. Yep. He is a contractor, primarily remodeling kitchen and bathrooms. He has a single axle dump trailer that will occasionally be on his property. He does have a shed or a detached garage in the back that can store a few items if needed, but prefers not to keep items back there in the detached garage. So he is the only employee and doesn't ever expect to have employees at the home, nor will he plan on customers coming to the home. So staff is recommending approval of this application with any conditions Planning Commission feels that are appropriate for Helpful Home Buyers located at 605 South, 400 East.
Okay. So is the applicant here? You'd be willing to come up and state your name, please?
Adam Stevens.
All right. Thanks for coming before us tonight. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
A couple of quick things. I'm not the most knowledgeable about what a single axle dump trailer is.
Sure.
What is it attached to?
Yeah, it attaches to a van or a truck.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That-
it's a basic trailer, but you
Okay.
don't have to unload it.
Yeah,
Is-
that,
is
you've
it in
answered
the
my
picture?
question.
Yeah, that was the one in the picture in the back there.
There's one in the picture that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right there
Yeah.
on the side.
Right there on the side.
My concern was whether or not it was attached to like a dump truck vehicle, which I think is problematic in terms of city streets. Other question is this coming before us because he's proposing to use a detached building?
General contractors, subcontractors, and handyman fall under home occupation B. And so as a major home occupation, it is in our ordinance to have it come before Planning Commission.
Okay. The reason I ask is because many cities arbitrarily and wrongly, in my opinion, prohibit the use of detached buildings for home occupations. I think it's absolutely silly. And so I'm tickled that there won't be a problem with him using his detached garage. Other than that,
Is that your ham antenna there?
No, that's my neighbor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, we're looking at it like,
I don't think you need a permit for
That's a
this.
small one.
So just to clarify, you're not going to be storing materials, if only maybe slightly or enclosed in the detached garage?
Yeah, I rented a storage unit for about 4 years and stored all my stuff in it when I was previously a contractor. Rarely got in it, and then sold everything at a garage sale. So I was like, I'm not going to keep materials anymore.
Yeah, okay.
It's such a waste.
And
Just
then-
leave them with the customer.
And then not, this is kind of a two-part of the same issue. Frequent deliveries then, probably not if you're not storing things.
No, generally delivered to the job site. Occasionally I'll have Amazon type deliveries, just hardware or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, and then not customers or employees coming and going, you're the only one?
No, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll let the applicant sit down.
Thank you.
Any other discussion that's needed here, commissioners, like any conditional uses you feel like that we need to impose or?
Now I'll make a motion to approve a conditional use permit for a major B home occupation for Helpful Home Buyers LLC located at 605 South, 400 East.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we got a motion and a second. We'll start with Commissioner Lyon.
Aye.
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 All right, so that motion passes unanimously, so you have your conditional use permit. Thank you. All right, our next item of business, item 5, final plat subdivision approval for Pintail Estates, preliminary plat approval under Manor Estates located at 67 North Angel Street. I'll turn the time over to staff.
All right, well, I think last time we were told that we have Trek here, the better-looking individual within Phil Holland's group.
Oh, I was hoping to see Phil.
I mean, isn't
I'm
that
telling
what?
him you said that.
Are you related to Phil? No. Okay.
I believe that's what we were informed that the last time Trek was here. Yeah, okay.
You can go back to the minutes. Important part of that meeting.
All right, so when the time comes, Trek is here to answer any questions. This is final plat subdivision for what we will be calling Pintail Estates. This came before the Planning Commission and the City Council under Manor Estates. City Council approved the preliminary plat approval on December 6th of last year. So the preliminary plat approval also, here's just an aerial of the view of the property as it sits now. The preliminary plat approval for Manor Estates / Pintel Estates came through and showed 11 lots. So this is one lot less than was previously proposed. There were some conditions that were accompanied with the approvals, and one of those was that we have the temporary turnaround noted, which is there is a note on the plat. It's not shown in the screenshot. I did include in the packet with this the construction drawings. One of the conditions that the Planning Commission imposed was that we show that sidewalk was going to be constructed on Angel Street. That just simply isn't anything we put on plats. That comes with the construction drawings, which is noted there that they'll have the sidewalk installed as part of the construction process. The City Council also had another condition, which was to include escrow agreement for the removal of the temporary turnaround and installation of the rest of the curb gutter and sidewalk outside of that temporary easement. That is also something in our subdivision code that we require when there is a temporary easement. So that's not noted on the final plat, but that is per code something that we would require on this item. So we have reviewed this, city engineers reviewed this, and we recommend approval of the Pintail Estates subdivision.
Melinda, is that something we need to note in the motion, or is that taken care of with the escrow agreement?
Is what something?
You guys have already taken care of that in your notes.
So the subdivision plat includes the note on the temporary turnaround already, if that's what you're asking. But the other two items, I don't think they need to be included in a motion. They're in our code. It's required when this develops. So
okay,
that answers the question.
that answers it.
I remember last time that I had the preliminary plat before us, there was a lot of discussion around having some type of strip like there at the end of the road. I wondered, was there any discussion about doing that, putting that on the plat, and why wasn't that included?
Yeah, and my apologies for not mentioning that, but let me pull up. That is also shown on the plat. I had discussions with Dexter, city engineer, about this. Hold on, Pintail MLP. Let me just pull up that. Okay, drag that over. As well. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah, I was hoping to see it blown
So
up.
one of my
Yeah.
pet peeves when people have like the whole screen, and especially in a Zoom meeting where you just can't see it. So what this shows is the right-of-way lines come all the way to the edge of the neighboring property. And so Dexter feels like that is the mechanics for showing that the right-of-way is intended to connect into the property to the north when it develops, if it develops.
Okay,
Yeah, when.
all right, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that clarification.
Can we put a note on there that no construction trucks can pass down Preston Street and muddy my road? No construction trucks can go past Bonneville down Preston.
I would like to motion that and have the commission vote on it.
I just wanna
Commissioner Ryan, I think that would be an interesting process for all of us. So just now that I have it pulled up, this is that note that says that. But it is part of our subdivision code under the streets under the streets section, that has to be done.
I've got a couple of questions.
Do we have any questions for the representative from the Phil Holland Group?
Yeah, I would like to ask a couple of questions of, with staff and the applicant. Looking at the plat, I believe there's just a couple of things that are in error. One is that temporary turnaround. It says a 40-foot diameter. I believe that's an 80-foot diameter or a 40-foot radius. So I would change that to say a 40-foot radius or an 80-foot diameter.
Is that in the note?
It says
Call out there, yeah.
it says a
40
40-foot
foot.
diameter. That's
Okay.
more than 40 feet across. It's 80 feet
Right.
across.
So it's
Just
maybe
change-
it was meant to be 40 foot from the center line?
Yes.
80 feet, but.
Yeah.
Like a radius.
Either 40-foot radius or 80-foot diameter.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, we can change that.
Yep. And then I had a question about public utility easements, and I don't know if staff knows this or not, but I wonder, how do utilities that need to go down from front to back, how do they accomplish that with no easements on side boundaries, on the length boundary? You've got a PUE on the back and a PUE on the front.
Yeah, so I had this conversation this week with Dexter as well on another item. And we do require a 10-foot PUE around the property. And what we're looking at doesn't show that, unless there would be some other note that would say each of the properties would have a.
I mean, the reason I ask is an obvious one, and that is there may be some easements that need to go down to the back from the front. And I don't know how you're going to accomplish that. If any of the utility providers needs to do that, there's not an easement there, and they'll have to go through some additional paperwork in the future to file an easement and get them to sign off it and go record it. Now, I'm not arguing with city policy, but cities I work for, usually we had a requirement for at least a front and one side, or at least on three sides, or a 15-foot wide easement, or maybe a minimum 10-foot wide easement straddling two properties. So I'm just throwing that out. I'm not saying you have to put that in. I'm just concerned for a future property owner, if they need to run anything in that side yard from front to back, there's no easement. And the utility company may not have to put it back the way that it was, and the homeowner could be a little distressed. So I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. And
I mean, just for your subdivision regulations, you may want to think about doing that. And then under the general notes, I see that Andy Thompson is still listed as the city engineer. Is that true?
so, Jay, who did this?
It says contact at, I think Andy retired before I did. So I don't know if you want to change that out to your new person, or if that's still the case, that's fine. But I just noted that that looked inaccurate to me.
It's Dexter.
It's in your general notes portion. It won't be on this sheet, unless it's a much bigger sheet than you're showing. So, under
It was on the subdivision plat or in the construction drawings?
yeah, it's in your general notes in your construction drawings.
Okay.
You might want to change that. And I don't know about the others, but Andy's, I believe, no longer our city engineer.
Who did your civils?
McFarland.
Scott McFarland.
Okay, all right.
I can just ask Scott to change that too.
So it wasn't, because I know Andy is still,
Consulting?
he's working for a firm. I don't know if it's CRS,
Okay,
but he still is working for an engineering firm.
yeah, but I think you should put Dexter on there if he's your engineer
I
now.
think we should too.
And then one editorial note, and this probably isn't the body for it, but I will be raising this issue with a council member or the mayor in the future, and that is, I think our rights of way are artificially wide, and it has no bearing on your subdivision. But like I said, editorial comment, we're putting in a lot of asphalt that's very expensive to maintain, and super expensive for the homeowner and the builder to put in. So last city I worked for, we put in one public road in 16 years. We had all private roads into subdivisions built to city standards. So just an FYI, I think that's something the city might want to look at. I think it's environmentally beneficial, and it's certainly financially better. So
Well, I think the state legislature is determined to take care of that this session, so
They're going to take care of lots of stuff.
yes, they are.
I was up there yesterday.
Yeah, so I
They're gonna
think
make it
that
all
they're wanting the max right-of-way or pavement width to be 28 feet. Is that right?
Holy cow.
Well, ours were at 20, and it worked great. And guess what? Hardly any accidents ever on a much narrower right-of-way.
Yeah.
So-
Well, and I think that is one of the reasons why we do have so many privs that come through without private street.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll talk to a council member or the mayor about that too, to say going forward, you might want to offer that as something to future subdividers, because it's an enormous expense. And then the ongoing cost for the city to maintain it. So anyway, thank you.
It's going to be harder to have parties and lots of public parking, but
Yep. Yep.
it's cheaper for everyone.
It sure is. Well, and when you have 28 feet, the standard she mentioned, where I worked in Holiday, it was 26 feet. A car is usually 6 feet or maybe slightly wider.
Yeah.
So it's still left 20 feet, which is wide enough for the fire code to allow a fire engine to come in and a car to go out and have parking. So 28 actually is the kind of, it's the Goldilocks number.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
This is a very large road.
Yeah, yeah. 28 is really an excellent standard that cities could look at going forward.
When do you anticipate starting construction?
Probably as soon as possible, late February, early March.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Go ahead and sit down. Thanks. Any further discussion needed, commissioners? Are you ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I motion that the Planning Commission approve the subdivision plat as proposed for Pintail Estates with the corrections as previously noted, which are changing either noting it as a 40-foot radius or an 80-foot diameter on the temporary turnaround, correcting, inserting the proper name of our city engineer, and for the staff to work with the applicant on whether or not an easement of 5 to 7.5 feet on side property lines is recommended if the applicant has no objection. This is not a motion to amend our code, but simply to suggest it to city engineer look at it, and if amenable for all, to include those. That's my motion.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Let's go start the voting with Commissioner Sunloff.
Aye.
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 All right, so the voting is unanimous in favor of approval of the preliminary plat, so you got it. Thank you.
Don't mud my road. Just don't mud my road.
Oh, yeah, for sure I won't. We have a good Swift guy who takes care of all that stuff. You won't even see mud.
All right. Well, the next item is call to the public, but the public just left, so unless we want our council member here to come and speak. All right, so we'll forego the call to the public. So we'll turn the time over to the staff for reports, correspondence, and calendar.
Did anybody send us any letters? Did we get any letters this week? Correspondence?
You want details?
We got a grandma request,
Oh, wow. What did Grandma want?
and, well, so a couple things, and then I'll get into that, but I'm happy to report that we've received several, I mean, maybe even a dozen applications at this point for our planning commission alternate positions. We have 2 of those open. Sad, I don't know if Cody has let everyone know, but he has announced his resignation from the commission, and we're very sad to hear that news. So we'll have 2 of the alternate spots to fill. The plan is to appoint Paul to be a permanent commissioner. So that appointment for Paul should take place next week at the city council meeting. And then we'll probably hold interviews next week with those that have applied for the alternate positions, and we'll figure out.
Cody, you weren't here.
Yeah, we'll be sad to see Cody go, but.
You weren't here very long.
I know, right? It was short-lived. So we'll be moving out of the area. I've accepted a position at Snow College as a vice president of
cool.
student affairs.
Awesome.
Great.
We'll let you go for that reason.
Thank you.
That's fantastic news. Congratulations, Cody.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I did want to have a conversation with the Planning Commission to help me better understand what you need from us as staff to have the confidence level that that the reviews we've done have met code. We did have, after last week's meeting, we had a grammar request come in, and I did just want to pull up all the documentation that we received when we that's not the one that I wanted to open. So these are the items that we receive that if the commission would like, we can include these in your packet when the preliminary plat comes to you. It's a bunch of technical information. So this is the geotech report. I wanted to pull up the drainage summary that we get. This one's 11 pages. Let's see. We have, I redacted these so we've got this grammar request. So it was quite a bit of staff time to go through, redact information, just some other background on the subdivision out there, the Westgate Commercial Subdivision. That application was received in August of last year. And so there was 5 months of back and forth between their engineers and Dexter before we placed that on the agenda. So we have these civil drawings that show some of the items that are required in the code, the landscaping. I think those are on page 7. Nope. I might have already passed them. Maybe they were on page 6 or 5. So these are the items that we have received, but I have not included those in your packet. If the commission feels like you need to have these in hand in the packet to have the confidence that the approval would meet code, I'm happy to include those. I'm trying to look at, let's see, preliminary. So I think with everything that I've pulled up here, everything within each of these documents contains the information on that subdivision preliminary plat section that are required. So if the commission wants these in the public meeting packet, we're happy to include those. I don't want to overwhelm you with information, but also want you to be able to have the tools and data that you feel like you need to make those decisions. So I just am looking for some feedback from the Planning Commission on what it would take for you to have the comfort level that all of these items have been reviewed.
Yeah. I mean, for one, I'd like to hear everyone's opinion on this on the commission, but I'll just lead out by saying that I appreciate the technical expertise that our staff has. And so, I mean, my preference would be that we just have some type of trust that we know that the items that are on in our ordinance are being covered. And so when we ask that question and we get an affirmative, we just know that all this review work is being done on the back end. Because I would say for myself, I do not have the technical expertise to be able to look at these drawings and know that they're being complied with. So.
Melinda, I actually have done a lot of this in the past, and I would be more than happy to come down and spend as much time as you want, or to just come into your office and go over these plans page by page and add any suggestions or comments. If you would like that, I'd be happy to do that. It's a particular expertise that I have is subdivisions and site plans. So anyway, I'd be happy to do that if staff, I have not had a chance to look at this. I've not been here. Has this been presented to the Planning Commission?
No, this was an outcome of the Planning Commission meeting last week where the discussion really led to a point where it appeared that none of this information, or at least not all of the information, had been received. And so we received then the following day a grandma request for all of this information. And so it has been given to the individual who requested that. And so this is my attempt to show the commission, this is the type of technical data that we do get. I don't review this because it's not my job to review this. The city engineer does. I don't supervise him either. He is technically in the Public Works Department. So, you know, whether or not he would want some, you know, years of expertise to accompany that. I don't know. I can let him know.
Offer stands.
Yeah.
And I'm no offense if it doesn't come back that you need me, but I'd be more than happy to donate some time.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was just really like, here's the information that we released to the member of the public. My guess is that if they have looked through this, they're not understanding most of it unless they're an engineer. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I mean, I think the geotech report is pretty straightforward and understandable, but you know, are these the items that you as a commission want to have included in each packet so that that trust is there, that we've received all of these items that the subdivision code in Title 19 requires? And if, you know, if you don't want them, how can we get to a point where there's, I think, better trust that we have received and reviewed all of these items prior to placing them on the agenda?
So over the years that I've been doing this kind of stuff, I mean, I've had the experience where we've had planning commissions where we did provide all of the information, and the packets were that big.
Yep.
And, you know, the experience was that by and large, the planning commissioners didn't go through all of that. They didn't have the technical expertise to do it. But the purpose it did serve was it showed that the information that was required had been submitted. And they at least knew it was there. So then the question became, is there a better way to do that rather than give everybody a copy of all of that information? And that was before the electronic days. It was to have a packet there on the staff's desk that says, here's all the information. If you want to look at any of this, it's available, but it's been reviewed. So the planning commissioners at least would have some understanding or feeling that, yeah, the information's been submitted, the staff has told us that it's all there and that they reviewed it. Electronically, I guess it's possible now that we can. It's not that big of a deal, but again, I question whether the planning commissioners would spend the time to go through it. And the purpose it just would serve would be to just indicate or at least show that all of the required information has been submitted, and then to have the verification from the staff that it's been reviewed and found, you know. Now, I think you also made a good point when you said that over a 5-month period, there was a lot of back and forth, and that's what usually happens on these things. The applicant submits the information, the staff reviews it, there's a bunch of stuff that needs to be changed, it goes back and forth several times, and finally you get to the point where the staff says, okay, you've met all the requirements now. My feeling has always been that when you come to the Planning Commission with this, and I usually ask the question, has the staff reviewed this and they find everything's in compliance, and you usually say yes. That's good for me, but I've got a level of trust because I've done this kind of thing for a long time and I kind of understand what goes into it.
I think I agree with that, if staff says that it's been done. But I remember the conversation. I don't remember a firm affirmative, and I think that would have put the conversation to rest last week. It wasn't the question asked, have all 22 points been?
Yeah.
And there wasn't a firm affirmative, and maybe
Well,
it's just a simple matter of
Sure.
going on record and saying, yes, all
Sure.
22
And-
have.
And I was attempting and maybe not adequately or eloquently enough to say, look, you know, when Dexter comes and says that it's ready, we trust that. But did I have a detailed conversation with him enough to stand up here and say with absolution that all of these items were submitted? I have never had that conversation with him. And so, you know, it was kind of my attempt to ensure that we weren't putting words in someone's mouth when a conversation hasn't been had,
Yeah.
but also try and say, like, this is the process. It comes in, it gets reviewed between, you know, Dan and Dexter are the ones that primarily do the subdivision reviews. Community development, my staff, we review for lot size requirements. We review for, you know, not parking, but we review for ensuring that the lot widths that are required are met. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward review on our end. The technical aspects are through a different department. And, you know, to me, when Dexter, you know, when our city engineer has said, okay, it's ready to be on the agenda, that's all I need to have that confidence. And so I may have, you know, inadequately answered that question, but it really was my attempt to say, look, we trust it, but I can't sit here and definitively say, yes, every single one of those items have been checked off, because that's just not a dialogue that we have.
Just a quick question. I was not able to read the staff report. I was out of town, so forgive me. But did the packet include any kind of a written statement from the city engineer that had been reviewed and the submittal was adequate? Standard practice in a couple of the cities I've worked for prior, we asked our city engineer to always give us an email so that we had it within the electronic file to say that he had reviewed and signed off. And that might be helpful if that's a concern that you are feeling, you know, somebody's, you know, trying to bite you and to say, have you reviewed this? If it's not your bailiwick, I strongly suggest to just have your city engineer give you a thumbs up in writing to say they've received a full submittal and they have reviewed it. Because I don't know how many times someone would ask us a extremely technical question about the orifice size of an outflow of a pipe. And as the planners, we would go, yeah, we're familiar with this, but no, we can't tell you that the city engineer, you know, we can't tell you that that works. But guess what? Our city engineer, who's licensed, can. And he has said he's reviewed it and it works. So that's just a suggestion. And another question is, do you have a technical review or a development review weekly meeting that includes your city engineer and or other staff, public works, that might need to look at development? If not, and no criticism, but I strongly urge you, you may want to have a weekly or biweekly meeting where you all look at the plans together and then make assignments or ask for information back, so that when you write the staff report, it's with the full confidence that you have reviewed it and other staff members who have a responsibility have signed off on it. And that may prevent any frustration and give you a lot of confidence.
That's been my experience as well, Paul, most frequently, is to have that kind of a weekly staff meeting.
Yeah. In fact, Wilf, I think you taught me that in Centerville in 1993 for about 2-3 months.
That was a
Right?
junior in high
Could have
school,
been.
just for the record. Wink, wink. We do have a weekly development meeting where we review these. We do that with all of the power department, public works. We have our fire department that attends this as well. Generally speaking, my staff, me, Dan, Mindy, and Dexter, have a meeting as well to go over the items that are going to be in the packet, and we have discussion about each of those items and whether or not they're ready to go forward. you know, we try to be accommodating with, I guess, kind of squeezing in deadlines and trying to be as favorable as we can to applicants to move things forward through a process that sometimes can be lengthy and is much lengthier in other communities, not necessarily here, but that's our process, and perhaps even just this explanation of what we do internally might provide better comfort level. But really, I'm looking for feedback on what is it that would help get you there. And if it's including all this information in the packets, we're happy to do that. But no, then, you know, our packets, I mean, I think just between these 3 items, we're looking at 80 or 90 pages. And when we have a couple preliminary plats, you know, our packets are going to be 200 pages plus 300 pages. So I'm just trying to provide the Planning Commission, you know, staff, that's our role, to provide you with the information and the details that you need to do your job. So I just need to know, you know, in greater detail what that is. And if it's a, you know, a statement from the engineer that we include in the packet that they've received and reviewed all these items, I think that's a very easy fix and one that doesn't create a monstrous size of a packet to sort through.
It's a good suggestion. It's not a bad idea.
Melinda, I would suggest that. I mean, I think having been on this side of it, and like Wilf and Paul, I think that's the piece that would work, because this has been reviewed time and time again. Unless there's a technical detail that we really need to review, I mean, if we really need to look at the size of the trap out here, you know, make sure that the oil separator is really in place and really going to be there, or when you make sure that the impervious or the pervious type of, you know, if it's impervious or pervious type of stuff is being used. I mean, that really gets into some technical details. You know, I'm looking at this, a couple of developments I did on the East Coast. I mean, this is the stuff I had to go through, you know, to get into the weeds. As a developer, this is the stuff that makes or breaks the project. So, you know, it becomes understandable when you're an engineer or on the other side, but as a planning commission member, I think as long as we have a checklist or the sign off from the engineer, I think this works.
Yeah, my opinion is we don't need this level of detail. You know, from time to time, there might be a civil engineer who sits in one of these seats who could read all this and know exactly what's going on and give an informed opinion about it. But by and large, we are not going to be experts that need this level of detail. So I'll echo kind of what's already been said. I think, and this was because I think I was one, maybe among others, that made the comment last meeting. I think what we need, and more importantly, what the public needs, is an understanding that what the requirements that are listed in this instance, the subdivision plat requirements in the code, were all submitted and satisfied to the staff's satisfaction, I suppose. And so if we just had a statement that says, you know, staff has reviewed the requirements of the subdivision ordinance in this section and has, you know, found everything that was required, or whatever, some statement to that effect, that's all we need, in my opinion. And something that we were talking about before the meeting, just very briefly, Toby and I, was if there are things historically that are on that list, I don't know what it was, 22, or let's just say 20 for sake of round numbers. If there's 3 items on that list that we just historically as a city have not really requested or needed to make an informed decision, then let's change the ordinance to make those things optional, or to make them only needed in certain circumstances. If we really need all 20, then let's keep it at all 20. If we only need less, then let's make it less. But what we shouldn't be doing, and this was my comment before, is having a mandatory list and then only requiring a portion of that list. That's not what we should be doing. And I don't think the staff is intentionally doing that, or has been. I'm not saying that. But if there's a mandatory list We just need it, in my opinion, we as a commission just need a statement from the staff that says, we have looked at the list, we have received everything on the list, and everything meets the code, period. And then we can totally rely upon that. If someone in the citizenry wants to question that, that is totally their prerogative. And maybe they're distrustful, perhaps rightfully so, perhaps not, but that's their prerogative to question. We as a commission just get to rely upon that, and I think that's all we need to be worried about, in my opinion.
So we will, probably after the bill passes, we'll need to amend our subdivision code because the state is going to change the way that process happens. There is one item on that list of 22 that's absolutely stupid, and I don't understand why you would require a statement conforming to the general plan on a subdivision. That makes no sense to me. So that would be one that absolutely wouldn't be left on that list. I know Dexter did make a few calls around to see what other cities do, whether or not they require this level of detail at the preliminary plat level or stage or at final plat, and it's kind of a mix of some require this upfront and others required it, on the back end, that final approval.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it trickles in depending on where you're at.
Yeah, and one of the subdivisions that'll be coming forward, a lot of those items just are not relevant to that particular subdivision. And so where it says they shall be submitted, well, they're not applicable.
Well, and if that's the case, then the ordinance needs to be changed because the way it's written, technically, you have to have all of them. And practically speaking, if they don't apply, I'm all on board with not requiring something that doesn't apply, but that the code needs to reflect that.
Sure. Okay. Well, we can work with engineering and figure out a process to just get some type of a statement to include in the packet, an email or whatnot that can provide that information for the commission to have the comfort level. Another item, just a heads up, we also received, I think, our first ever text amendment application, but the neighbors over there in the Westgate area have submitted an application to amend code to have proximity requirements that essentially would disallow the sale of beer or tobacco products at that commercial property because of its close proximity to a school. So
Wouldn't the state code take care of at least the alcohol part of that?
So I guess the state code, yes. So state code says that it can be done within 200.
Oh.
It can't be done within 200 feet.
Okay.
And this is outside that, right?
Or 600,
Yes,
or
it's
600,
it's about
600 walking
500.
feet.
I see.
Yeah, exactly.
I
It's
see, I see.
about 250 feet away. And so they're proposing that we adopt a local code that is more stringent than what
Can
is-
we do that?
Can we go against state code? Because
So
I think,
we couldn't previously, good questions, but in 2018, the laws were changed and a local jurisdiction can adopt, I don't know about tobacco, and I need to do more research on this, but there's evidence that there's a Maverick in Clinton across the street from a elementary school, I think, or a school, and they do not sell beer. And that's because Clinton City passed that.
because those alcoholic sixth graders.
Yeah. So that'll be coming forward. We'll need to spend some time. I want to research state code. I don't want to just take for somebody else's word that is something that is allowed. But
Let me ask you a question. If they're vested now, does that mean that the use is vested as of now versus when the ordinance goes into effect?
Well, they haven't applied yet.
yeah, so the vesting on that wouldn't take place until they submit a business license application.
Well, can I differ on that? I believe vesting occurs once a full and complete application has been submitted.
Yep.
That's when you're vested.
Yep.
So that's why it's so critical to get all of the things submitted to the city. That's when the curtain comes down on anybody applying for a challenge to shut down the use. So it's really essential to just get everything in and make sure all the checklists have been, and that's why that development meeting that I've been involved in and Wilf has for years and years is so important, because you're always aware of those grandma requests and the people who want to come in and shut that down. So that's the rule.
Yeah.
Full and complete application, dated and fee paid, and then they're safe. The applicant is safe.
For the land use code, yes. But
Yeah.
if that was to be something that was in our business license code, there wouldn't be vested until they submitted the business license.
I think Paul's right on this, and there's been one, I know this because I'm fighting it in a city right now. There's an ombudsman opinion from June of last year that directly addresses this and talks about the case law that talks about it, or that addresses it. And then there was another ombudsman opinion from, let's say, 2 or 3 years before that, that says vesting in the land use is what's critical, and business license applications or things similar to that do not affect what would be allowed by the land use. So if, for example, a retail business includes the sale of alcohol in the land use code, that cannot be restricted by a business license. That's my understanding, but I would say the city should look at those recent ombudsman opinions before they, come down one way or the other.
And the reason I asked this is we ran into the same problem with the development we did in Morgan, where the citizens didn't want alcohol sold at a hotel we brought in. And so there was some issues there. And the vesting of the property became critical in that instance, because when the application was paid versus when the citizens came back and tried to change the code. And so I think, anyway, there's some questions there.
To some extent, though, this is kind of
Answer.
a fight between the property owner and the neighbors, not so much
Yeah, it
the
is.
city.
I'm just looking, that's the general commercial zone, right, Melinda?
Yeah, it's general commercial.
General commercial does say, it specifically talks about retail sales, not including sale of beer for consumption on the premises.
Yeah, so if it's excluded in the use, then that could affect things for sure.
So the on-premise consumption or sale of beer.
Yeah, it's just
is
for
additional
consumption.
use. So
Oh,
the sale for off-premise consumption would be a permitted use.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, anyway, that's my understanding of how the law currently reads. And of course, ombudsman advisory opinions are exactly that, just advisory. They're not they're not binding. But I think it would be worth the city looking at, again, I think it was June 14th of 22 ombudsman opinion. Maybe it wasn't the 14th. It was in June of 22.
Do you remember the name of the community?
No, but I think there wasn't very many in June of 22 that the ombudsman issued.
So they used to list them in
By date.
Yeah,
by
they
date,
did.
but I'm not finding that.
Oh.
It's by topic or by, what was the other? Anyway, but I'll look at that.
If you looked at by topic, it would be under like vested rights or something, and then it might show up by date. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'll look at it, but it's showing two ways, by topic, and then the number of the advisory opinion obviously would be one that would have been in the 200s, because I know we were up into the 200s as of last year, so I can look at those. We had one that submitted it took them about 10 months, I think, to issue the advisory opinion. And that happened shortly after I left Murray. We submitted one on exactions, I think, or we didn't submit it, the applicant did. But we'll look at that, and if that's the case, I don't know if my belief is it'll take us 60 to 90 days to get their text amendment through a process to see, right? I mean, because like I said, we need to make sure that that's something that we can do. So that will be coming forward in the next 2 or 3 months. And then...
So I have a question that will probably show my ignorance, but when I looked at the state code for alcohol, didn't it have two different stipulations, either by a straight line or by walking, riding?
Pedestrian.
That's confusing to me, because if you draw a straight line, it's a heck of a lot shorter than the walking, so I don't understand why it has both. And if we did come up with some type of city ordinance, could we like
I mean, I think the easiest
choose
way
one
to
or the
do
other?
it is-
Because I think that's very controversial.
Well,
Yeah.
one is to the entrance, you know, it's confusing.
It's confusing to me.
It is.
So,
I'm glad I'm not the only one, because I was like, depends on who draws the line or who's measuring, right?
There are many things in the state code that are confusing.
that's the whole problem.
I'm glad that's not just me.
Let's see, I'm trying to think, there was something else. Oh, we will have on the planning commission meeting agenda at our next meeting to do the public hearing for putting conditional uses to staff instead of the planning commission. So that will reduce, I think it may reduce the amount of need for meetings.
Number of meetings per month?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And maybe we could even go to monthly meetings, which would be especially nice for me because I'm here every Thursday night pretty much between city council and planning commission. So we know for sure that'll be coming to you. And let's see, I was trying to think of something else. Oh yes, the sign code. We've done so I had this realization on my drive home from the meeting last time that I think initially UDOT was going to number West Davis Corridor as State Route 67, the continuation of Legacy. So our major street plan that says I-15, 89, and State Route 67, I think that means the West Davis corridor. So as we would then interpret that, they would be allowed a 30-foot sign height at that location, which I think is adequate. So we'll probably be amending that major street plan just to correct that error. I think it was last amended in 2017. But I don't know if maybe when they started out with their, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I guess 2017, when that was amended, they probably figured it would continue on with the numbering. But UDOT's using a different numbering. It's going to be State Route 177.
Oh.
So, that was kind of my, because I was like, why would Kaysville have in their code Legacy, which doesn't come through our community? And the only thing that makes sense, and then would be that was meant to be State Route, or the continuation of the numbering. And then that following Monday at our weekly development meeting, I asked the Public Works Director, I said, do you know what State Route 67 is? And he's like, it's the West Davis Corridor. And so that was, a learning moment for us all, that West Davis Corridor would be numbered with the State Route 177 as opposed to the continuation of Legacy's numbering. We have done some preliminary research though, just as an FYI, and I think some of the information that was given to the Planning Commission from one of the community members wasn't accurate. My guess is that is because it's very complex to go through land use code and figure out how it applies to a particular piece of property. But to our knowledge, the only community that treats the Legacy Highway any different is Centerville, and they have a shoreline proximity that they wouldn't allow any signage within 150 feet of the shoreline. And other than that, Farmington does not have anything in their code. Neither does Woods Cross, I believe, and Dan's the one that.
So we wouldn't be the only ones that were different, because that's how it was pitched, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was, my guess is that's just because they don't know how
That's as much as they
code
can.
works. Yeah, in fact, the conversation that I had with a community member, 2 times he insisted, no, they can have a height of 45 feet, and I said, no, it's only 8 feet, because if we go by that classification and I apply the major street plan with the principal arterials, 200 West is not a principal arterial. They're not near enough a principal arterial to have that code, but again, after the meeting, the realization that I think it was intended to just have that West Davis corridor established as a principal arterial. So I think it's, you know, I mean, those of us that work in land use and you as the Planning Commission, it gets very complex. So I don't know if there was any intent on that part, but just at our kind of first look at some research, it really doesn't appear that there is anything vastly different. I think the most primary reason for no signage along Legacy is that there's really no development. There's no real business district, and I think Centerville does have the closest thing to that. And you can tell, you know, they don't have those businesses that are on the west side of Legacy. They don't have big, tall signs, but I don't think they're really the type of businesses that put tall signs up to draw the public's attention in. I mean, it's the zero res cleaning and things like that. So I don't think that we'll be prioritizing then the direction from the Planning Commission of kind of looking at that from the standpoint of, I think the fix is there. They do a 30-foot tall sign. So we'll probably prioritize these other items that are coming through, like the text amendment that we just received from the community, so from the citizen that submitted that. And I know it looks like Commissioner Lyon wants to ask a question, so that's really all I had. And I was going to see too if Wolf wanted to maybe give a brief update on anything you've been reading with the...
Oh, my word.
Wolf's more tired now than he's ever been.
It's really, I mean, I always say this. Every session is different and has its own, and I always say, this is really something else that's coming out of this session, and every year we say that. And again, it's true this year because a lot of the bills, you know, the big land use bills that have been talked about all summer, they're starting to pop out, and they're not looking anything like what we talked about during the summer. And that's apparently not intentional on anyone who's working on them part. It's just, it's a factor of the legislative staff is not experienced. They've got a lot of new people, and I think they're not really understanding what needs to be drafted and how to be drafted and or to ask.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
these
there's
bills,
some duplicate bills too that are covering
yeah,
the same
stuff.
topics.
Yeah.
But I had my browser window. I clicked on Will's link earlier today and didn't get around to reading it. But I will say this: I copied and pasted. Maybe it was from a couple days ago. The part where Wolf says, you know, hey, we're putting a lot of kind of unfunded mandates on our planning staff. And one of the next things that we need to work on will be amending our general plan to be in compliance with the water conservation efforts. And that's something, you know, so when we talk about sign code, like those are the priorities, because I think the deadline for being in compliance with that is April.
yeah, I'm trying to remember.
And
yeah, I mean, it's coming up.
We barely have time to eke that by, and we have a very limited bandwidth with our staffing here. So
It's, scroll down a little bit further, Linda. It's, I think towards the end of this one.
oh yeah, it was
There
this.
you go.
I copied and pasted this into an email and sent it to the mayor and our interim city manager, which is our finance director has been appointed to serve in that role for the next couple of months. But, you know, there's a lot that's being thrown at us right now, and it's pretty overwhelming to look at it in its entirety. And I think one of the most regrettable things about it all is that in each of these instances, there's really what's the message that's coming back from the league staff and the state legislature is there's no room for negotiation. There's no room to try and improve a bill or change things to to make it more workable. I sat on the moderate income housing call this week, and they had changed the reporting dates and moved that up to August, and I think that they were thinking they were reporting off of a fiscal year perhaps, but they want the report to be adopted by a resolution of the city council, and if the fiscal year ends June 30th and we have to create a report and get it in front of a city council in July when we only have one meeting because it's either the 4th or the 24th, and the commission, you know, like, that's a lot. And so we were trying to have the league staff go back and negotiate a minimum of 60 days, but ideally 90 days, so that staff could have that time to put those reports together. You know, because I've said on many occasions, we're only as busy as however many applications we receive. And, you know, when we have 8 applications that we're balancing, I mean, we had a pretty big fall last year, what slides? And it's those things oftentimes, I think, that Will was pointing out in here, that our code then ends up not getting changed, and it's out of compliance with what state is, or it's in conflict with state code. So I guess all that to just say that I think there's a lot coming out of this session. The subdivision code is one that is being reviewed, and that will require us to modify our code that we have on the books, and we need to modify that anyway, based on the last couple of meetings in our conversation.
Does that, if they modify that, I mean, that was one of the questions I had on that, kind of looking at it just in brief, and maybe Wolf can answer this. Is that going to require some general plan changes that we have? I mean, this is, and it's unspoken whether or not that's going to happen, but I'm imagining some cities are going to have to amend their general plan. I mean, there's a cost in some of this.
Yeah, I mean, for the subdivision, to me, that's a very separate issue from general plans.
Yeah,
I don't see how general plans relate to subdivisions, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done there. In my mind, what may have to happen, if anything, is we would have to amend our development standards, and I think there was a law passed a few years back that requires a public hearing for that. If I recall correctly,
Yes.
and I'm not sure.
For the subdivision?
Yes, it does.
For the subdivision standards.
Yes, it
They
does.
took it out. There was a requirement for a public hearing in subdivisions years ago, but that was taken out several years ago.
Okay, that's out.
So, you know, it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
So we'll keep you busy with that instead of conditional use applications, but that'll be helpful too, that we won't have to write staff reports for each of these items and bring, you know, the applicants in, and I think that'll be a much friendlier, expedient process for those who apply for those conditional use permits. Was that?
Yeah, it answers. I mean, everything coming out of session just seems like it's all stick, no carrot.
And I'd agree. And I think that the narrative that has been portrayed for years, I think, is just kind of the standard belief now. And the narrative is that cities are working actively to make developers' life as miserable as they can on every step of the process. And that's not been my experience in places where I have worked. That may be how some cities move forward.
Yeah,
but
I mean, there are
sure.
some.
So I think in many ways we're all being hit over the head for something that, you know, it's not a Kaysville problem.
For a few bad actors.
Yeah, it wasn't a Murray problem. It wasn't a Pleasant View problem. And when I was in Grand County, it wasn't a problem either. So I don't know who those communities are, but, you know, the belief out there is that we're just kind of the barrier in every way we possibly can to
Melinda,
stop. Yeah.
there have been, I mean, over the course of my career in public service, there were a few large, very large entities that developed a horrific reputation for customer service and how they handled people. And I think what you're seeing now is the result of some of the largest entities in the state stonewalling and bullying. And I'll give you one example. The last city I worked for, incorporated simply to get away from the evil empire that they thought was Salt Lake County. And Wilf, you were there, I think, after it had reformed a bit. So no criticism toward Wilf at all. In fact,
Well, and I wasn't involved in that aspect of it.
Yes.
There, but I think it did change there.
Yeah. When I started working with Salt Lake County, with Sandy City back in the day, I mean, there was unbelievable the attitude that public employees and that institution had, and downtown Salt Lake City. Sometimes the larger cities would have the most requirements. And so I'm not trying to point fingers. I've got colleagues and brethren and sisters at all of those places. But, Holiday literally incorporated because they were so furious that their land use was being dictated by a building on 21st South and that they had no say with that group. And so they incorporated and said, screw you guys. We're going to be our own self. And, that is what is happening at the legislature is you have, I think, decades of stonewalling, and you have these bitter fights about revenue generation with building permits. Some cities did some things that really weren't that great and created a lot of animosity with the home builders, contractors. And so I think some of that's well-deserved and some of it isn't. But unfortunately, all of us, because everything you just complained about, I personally experienced with the moderate income housing and the constant changes to LUDMA and how difficult, impossible it was every year at the end of the session. You've just felt completely discouraged because you have a limited amount of time, you call it bandwidth, limited amount of time and energy to handle the horrific amount of development you may have in front of you at the moment. Oh, and by the way, you got to go codify all this stuff. And you've got to do it with a part-time off-site attorney who is serving 3 other cities at the same time.
Yeah.
So bottom line in all of this is, what?
Particularly hard for the smaller communities.
Yes, the smaller cities are just brutalized by the legislature. And it's not one size fits all. But I will say this. I do think, as my editorial comment, that from my perspective, having been a resident of this city for going on 30 years now, I believe this city has done an injustice to its citizens over the years by rushing headlong into the 1970s, is what I've always said, with not having a planning staff. And I am looking at the expressions on your 2 faces right now, and I'm feeling weary just looking at you. And I'm feeling the sense that I used to feel when I was in your place. And what I'm saying is, I support you. I see what you do. I appreciate the way you respond. I appreciate the work you're doing. But my sense is that this city has continually shortchanged. Council member, I'm not being critical of you, but you're here. I hope you're listening. I think there is additional staffing that Melinda needs for some of this. And whether it's just a consulting budget for overflow would really be helpful. It doesn't have to be full-time in-house paid with benefits, which is expensive. But please consult with your department head here and give her and her coworkers the help that they need, because this is complex stuff and it can run you completely into the ground. And it's by people way up on that Capitol who just don't understand the unfunded mandates that they often do. So I would implore our council member, to please look into this if you can. And I'm happy to help in any way you need with checklists or advice without interfering. I promise that's the last thing I'd ever do. So for what it's worth, we appreciate you. But we've got to do more as a city for our planning function.
When Steve mentioned about this being not mostly all sticks, I think there's a lot of truth to that. But like the provision you talked about, Melinda, about having to amend our general plan for the water. And let me tell you something, that if you look at that section in the state code, it is incredibly detailed.
Well, it's complex.
Oh, my gosh,
The-
the
the com-
detail you have to put into that.
Yeah, and the complexity, I mean, you're going to end up hiring a consultant on every one of those.
Well, yeah.
And-
Now, there is a carrot in there that the state last year, the legislature did put some money in the Division of Water Resources to assist communities in doing that. But my guess is most of that money is going to go to small communities that don't have any or much staff. And so I don't know
Bigger
if, you know, you
community,
can
but
get
we
help
don't
there.
have much staff.
Yeah, yeah.
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 What's our
Well,
population?
What's our population?
Yeah.
33,000.
Okay. So we're third class, second class? Which one are we?
We are
Third class, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're talking about fourth and fifth class cities, Wilf. So, wow.
Yeah, the legislative session is very deflating. I'm the balloon where you let go and it's ends up on the floor in a, anyway, not really, but.
Don't talk about
We'll do what
balloons
we
this week.
can and we'll manage as much as we can in fashions that we can. Well, that's all I have, so I think the
Okay.
next-
Well, I'd just like to echo what Commissioner Aller was saying. Thanks to the staff for all your tireless work, so keep it up, and we'll try to get some help for you. And then also just like to thank Commissioner Branch for your service to the Planning Commission, and wish you well in your new endeavors. And so with that, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
We are adjourned.